Welcome to our cozy channel. Relaxation meets mind-expanding philosophy here. Hit subscribe to unlock a world of calmness and intellectual fun. Immerse yourself in our captivating videos as serenity and wisdom nurture your being. Join us around the campfire for peaceful sleep and deep contemplation. Let the transformative journey begin. If you ask anyone around you if they know what art is, it's very unlikely that they will answer no. Art is part of our lives, and there's no need to be a specialist in the field to intuitively understand what we mean by this word. However, if you ask that same person to explain what art is, or to give a definition, things will start to get complicated for them. Art is a difficult concept to define, and not everyone has the same conception of it. Some may see it as what we find in museums, while others may view it as a means of accessing the divine, or as a space of creation or expression of an artist's sensibility or inspiration. It's clear how complicated it is to agree on a common and unanimous definition of what art is. After all, each of these definitions may contain a part of the truth, or perhaps art is simply what each person wants to see in it. Art as subjectivity. But can't we try to see things more clearly? A quick examination of the etymology of this word can help us. The word art comes from the Latin ars, which means technical skill or know-how. Moreover, in Greek, arts was called techne, which seems to be close to the sense given to it by the Latin word. Art would thus be, first of all, technical mastery, which is not surprising, as, even though we sometimes forget it, the artist is first and foremost the one who masters a technical know-how. To be a painter, for example, one must have learned how to paint, that is, to handle a brush. Just as to be a musician, one must first be able to play a musical instrument properly. This could be considered the minimum condition. No technique, no art, and no mastery of technique without learning, that is, without work. Note that the word art, understood as technical know-how, also refers to both the creation of the artist and the fabrication of the artisan. Thus, artist and artisan would have an important point in common: the shaping of matter to extract a work or an object. Let's not forget that the work is first and foremost the product of the one who works, that is, the worker. The word work in Latin is opera. The idea that art primarily appeals to our senses can help us understand another opinion that is quite widespread for good or bad reasons. We will see that art must be beautiful. This definition of art as the pursuit of beauty is one of the most commonly accepted, even unconsciously, and even though it is currently the subject of serious debate. When we listen to a musical composition or a song, when we look at a painted canvas or an architectural monument, it is its beauty that we seek, and it is what will lead us to judge the work based on the feeling or emotion that it has managed to produce in us. We often say that a work that we love touches us. By that, we mean that it moves us and triggers something within us that has to do with the feeling of the sublime. It is worth noting that it is entirely possible to experience such a feeling without going through the medium of art. For example, by contemplating a natural landscape, a sunset, or by attending a special event that will produce a very similar effect in us. A declaration of love, a reconciliation between two friends who had not spoken to each other for a long time, an act of charity, courage, or forgiveness. Perhaps there is something like art in the examples I have just given, and all those who have seen images passing through their heads at the moment when I evoked them will perhaps have time to feel an emotion quite close to the one that the artist seeks to create through a work. This shows that when we talk about beauty in art, we are not talking about beauty in the usual and banal sense of the term. A car can be beautiful without being considered a work of art, except perhaps for some enthusiasts. A vase, curtains, or a mobile phone could also be described as beautiful, but are they works of art? Nothing is less certain. Therefore, we must not confuse beauty and prettiness, even though this word is not very pretty itself. We say that something is pretty when we find it pleasant to look at or hear. What is pretty provides a pleasant sensation, a pleasure of the senses, but it does not go any further. Prettiness leads to what the German philosopher Immanuel Kant called pleasantness, which is what is agreeable to our senses. Sensation is not the same as sentiment. Sensation is, in a way, the superficial layer of sentiment, and a large part of disagreements about what is beautiful and what is not comes from our tendency to unintentionally confuse sentiments and sensations, beauty and pleasantness. Let's take an example that should shed some light on this. If I say that Victoria is more beautiful than Margot, I am expressing a matter of taste. In other words, a personal opinion that merely reflects my preferences in terms of pleasantness. Depending on whether I prefer blondes or brunettes, tall or short people, blue eyes or brown eyes, someone else might very well have the opposite view and find Margot more beautiful than Victoria, without that changing my judgment, and without it being possible to say that one of us is right and the other wrong. In fact, in this situation, we are only expressing a difference in taste with regard to the pleasantness that a particular person arouses in us. As everyone knows, tastes and colors are not a matter of dispute. Pleasantness is linked to each person's personal tastes and concerns only the domain of the senses. Beauty, on the other hand, is independent of taste and concerns the domain of the mind. It is of the order of the sublime, and the sublime is not a matter of subjectivity, even if not everyone is equally sensitive to it. In the 18th century, the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham founded utilitarianism, a doctrine that makes pleasure the ultimate goal of human existence. According to him, all pleasures are equal, and anyone who would judge that dipping their fingers in a jar of jam to lick them is a less noble pleasure than the spiritual ecstasy provoked by reading a poem is in error. Yet, do we not recognize this idea in our everyday life, namely that some pleasures are more valuable than others? I can take great pleasure in sleeping, for example, without organizing my life around this single activity, just as I can greatly enjoy the pleasures of the table without spending my days eating. Of course, what gives us pleasure is our own and cannot be judged as good or bad. However, we can make a distinction between these various forms of pleasure and what we call happiness, which is a much higher state than mere sensual pleasure. Returning to our initial topic, we could say that pleasure is to happiness what pleasantness is to beauty, a passing and subjective sensation that, although pleasant, does not give us the satisfaction and fullness of the other. To say that beauty is not something subjective, but rather something objective and universal, is to collide head-on with the dominant opinion for which personal taste comes before any idea of hierarchy. We repeat that it is a mistake to confuse beauty and pleasantness, and that if we can assert that beauty is something objective and invariant, in other words, something that goes beyond our personal aesthetic preferences, it is because there is a reason for it. This is what we will see in the final part of this episode. Among the other definitions given to art, there is one that has long held sway, that of art as imitation of nature. This brings us to the last part of this episode. If you've followed everything that has been said so far, it will only require an extra effort of attention to hold on until the end. And if what has been said doesn't seem very clear to you, it is obviously not forbidden to listen again. For Plato, beauty is a property of truth, or, in other words, beauty and truth are one and the same thing expressed in different forms. This idea may seem quite strange when one is not used to this way of thinking. However, it can be found in many other fields, for example in science, when a researcher wants the formula he or she develops to be elegant without modifying its result, or in politics, where the ideals advocated are more about the beauty of a just society than its functional character. Plato even called his ideal city the beautiful city of Acadia. But let's get back to the subject. Beauty in the arts would be the equivalent of truth in science, or goodness in moral life. Beauty, truth, and goodness would in fact be one and the same thing seen from different angles and expressed in specific languages. They have a common source, which Plato called the good, but which others would call God. One should not focus here on the contemporary connotation of these terms, which, if interpreted correctly and according to traditional usage, designate one and the same thing. One word can summarize what beauty, truth, and goodness express. It is harmony. And it turns out that in Greek, harmony was called cosmos. Cosmos is the name given to the universe, that is, the world taken in its broadest sense, and which assumes that this same universe obeys laws that manifest order. The laws that govern the cosmos are not visible to the naked eye. That's why their discovery requires observation and intellect to formulate them. For many, it is mathematics that governs the cosmos, to the point that some, like Pythagoras, did not hesitate to say that numbers were the language of God, meaning the creative principle. But then you may ask, what does this have to do with art? If harmony is a property of the cosmos or the universe, beauty is the reflection of this harmony in a sensible form. Notice how the word harmony is ubiquitous in art. In music, of course, but also in painting with the harmony of forms, in poetry with the harmony of words, in dance with the harmony of movements. Harmony seems essential, and the entire work of the artist seems to be precisely to restore it through his or her work, even if it breaks away from appearances. Thus, it is possible to say that a musical composition is just when it produces in us a sense of harmony. That is, when it faithfully and precisely expresses the feeling that the musician seeks to convey. The same goes for poetry, where sometimes the verses we read seem totally devoid of meaning if we take them in their literal and explicit sense. Art is not the place of the explicit, but of the implicit. It is not the place of the superficial and the apparent, but of the profound and the subtle. Art defies nonsense, it speaks to the heart. Many are the artists and intellectuals who have tried to give an objective definition of beauty. Even though such an enterprise risks being ill-received in the Encyclopedia of the Enlightenment, in the article Beau, Diderot writes that beauty is the result of the perception of relationship. The notion of relationship indicates that beauty resides more in the disposition of elements in relation to each other than in the elements themselves. You can experience this for yourself by choosing a beautiful polka dot shirt, a beautiful striped pants, a beautiful check jacket, and see if the result is beautiful. You will then realize that beauty does not result from the simple addition of beautiful elements, but from the general harmony of the combined elements. Beauty is a matter of relation, we could say of proportion. No wonder that Leonardo da Vinci, or even Johann Sebastian Bach, had so much recourse to the geometry of the golden ratio in their work. A discrete yet effective presence of mathematics. If you accept this reasoning, then you will also accept this definition of harmony, so precious to the artistic process as the invisible source of visible beauty. In the 19th century, the German philosopher Hegel wrote that art was the crystallization of the absolute in a sensible form. We find here the idea that the ambition of art cannot be reduced to the simple imitation of appearances. On the contrary, it is reality itself incarnating in a sensible form. Now we understand much better why some artists have been qualified as prophets. It was not a question of saying that they announced in their works the future of the world and humanity. A prophet is someone who acts as a transmitter between the divine and the world of men. It is therefore the one through whom God finds the opportunity to express himself. The vocation of the artist seems to join that of the prophet, namely to be the channel between cosmic order and human materiality. The artist is ultimately just an interpreter, a subtle and transparent interpreter who can easily be mistaken for crazy, to the point of being considered as such by his contemporaries. Don't we say that true artists are generally recognized after their death? True because they are truthful, bearing a truth that does not address reason, but the heart. Blaise Pascal distinguished between those who called it truths of reason and truths of the heart. The truths of reason are those sought by scientists who address our intellect first. Truths of the heart find their privileged expression in art and religion. These two forms of truth, truth of reason and truth of the heart, are of course incomparable to each other, and it seems that it is the philosopher's task to reconcile and unify them. Let us not forget that in Greek, truth was called aletheia, which means withdrawal of the veil of appearances. Aletheia also means reality. Once again, the role of art seems to be to restore reality in its truth. This episode obviously did not claim to offer a 6-part exposition on art or to exhaust the subject. We only hope that it will have brought elements of reflection to all those who question what underlies our humanity and animates our desire to know the world, of which culture, beyond these divisions, remains the most beautiful illustration. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Join our community and be the first to know when new content drops.